Hey class, Prof JC here, and I'm looking forward to what we're going to talk about this week. I think it's important when we're talking about communication. This idea of connection is one of the most important aspects. So what we're titling our talk, our podcast this week is 5 must-haves. Okay, 5 must-haves to make people listen to you. And then I want to talk a little bit about non-connectors. So what are things that we do that keep people from connecting with us? So let's talk briefly about the non-connectors. So again, this book is talking a lot about communication from the perspective of giving a speech, giving a talk. But I also want you to think about it from the perspective of having conversations with other people, leading team meetings. How do you interact with your family? For some of you, it's just maybe you would say, I want to get better at communicating with my family. So how do we do that? Okay. So this book is I think it's a really good one. But before we get into the 5 things that you need to have, what John Maxwell talks about here are the non-connectors. Here are things that we're doing if we're giving a talk, we're giving a speech, if we're teaching, if we're up in front of a group of people, if we're doing these things, and I think he's got 6 things here. These are non-connectors, okay? So people who don't know how to connect, they speak in monotone. You've heard people speak that way for blah, 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 blah. It's just boring. It puts you to sleep. It's a good thing to listen to at nighttime when you're getting ready to go to bed, right? People who talk and they have a lack of substance and content. That's important. If you're gonna, I was giving a class last week to a Fortune 500 company, and we were talking about this. If you're going to give a talk or a presentation in front of a group of people, whether that group of people is 3 people or whether it's 300 people, you've got to understand they're giving you their most important asset, which is time. And so the thing that you need to do is to make sure you've got substance and content. That's the most important thing. Okay. They need to walk away and really believe that it was value add for them. If you're just up there talking, and I think the worst people who do this are people who just get up and they start talking about themselves and don't apply anything to you or to me, right? Those are the communicators we don't want to listen to. This next one here that John Maxwell talks about is just dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. And I was just listening to a speaker the other day do this. It was actually a pastor talking to his congregation, and I just thought it's no wonder why that church isn't growing. Speaking down to an audience. And that's what this person was doing. I heard several times the pastor say, I want, and then I actually heard him say, I expect. And he's talking about things that he wants from his church, from his congregation. And one of them, he just kept saying, I want this church to be a kind of church that is this. I want this church to be a kind of, I want. Well, it's not what you want, right? It's about the congregation. That's number 1. But number 2, when he said, I expect, he said that 2 different times. I expect, and it was some kind of thing, and it was actually a good cause he was talking about. It was a really good cause. But I expect 100%, every single one of you to be involved in this. What? Good night, man. This is in 4th grade, right? In 4th grade, you're used to hearing a 4th grade teacher say, I expect that you will be here on time. I expect that you'll be, whatever, but not from a religious, a spiritual leader coming to his congregation. So anyway, and then wonders why, the congregation is not growing. That could be a reason why. An angry demeanor that kind of came out with that. I expect, you could sense the frustration. It wasn't happening as fast as he wanted the thing he was sharing about. And so what came out was I expect. And that angry demeanor never works with a crowd ever. I remember, even some of you probably had this happen too. If you remember back to an elementary school teacher who got angry, I ran with the crowd, and there was one teacher in particular. Her name was Mrs. Goff. I named her Lois Goff, Mrs. Goff. And boy, she's got an extra crown waiting for her in heaven. And I just remember one time she just let us have it. There was another one named Mrs. McCracken. I don't know why I'm giving you these names. I think both have passed away. But the other one was Mrs. McCracken, and she would just yell and yell and yell. And it never worked. That's all I'm going to say. Oh, Miss Goff and Mrs. McCracken. Poor body language. So people that have poor body language, I don't need to say too much about that. You understand? And then no practical application. So if you're speaking to someone, you're not giving practical application, how this can help them today, right? Especially if you're working with adults, they need practical application. How does this help me today in my work and in my life? So here are the 5 must-haves to make people listen to you. Okay. First one is relationships. Okay. Now, this is tough if you're just starting out because you're not going to have relationships with crowds, right? But I've seen this to be true. Um, I've shared with you that I do these trainings in the marketplace for different companies, and I've been doing it now for 2 years. Um, it's like a side gig that I have. It's kind of fun to do. Um, and it's taken about 2 years for me to build relationships with some of these companies, right? So I work for another company who does this. And I have seen in recent weeks now when we log on, a lot of these are virtual. So I sit right here in my office and I do these trainings. And when you're starting out, people just, they're wary of you and they don't want to listen to you. Like who, you know, they're like who are you? But the more that you show up, right, it happens. And you all know what I'm talking about. When you're leading people, you have a new assignment as a manager or a leader. Um, Nobody trusts you. Nobody really likes you. You've got to earn it. And once you have relationship, which only takes time, all right. Really poor leaders are the ones who try to rush that. They're needy, right? That's not the kind of manager or leader you want to be. But you just give it time. You just say, hey, these people don't trust me because they don't know me. But over time, you gain relationships. And one of these the book talks about as well, that if you don't have the relationships with the crowd, so let's say you do get asked to go speak somewhere and you don't have relationship and you're not going to have time to build one, if you can build credibility with the crowd. I was asked to speak at this one place, and there were about 200, it was leaders in the room. So this was up in Colorado. I'd never met any of them, and I knew that I would not have, this was not a building relationship thing. I had 4 hours with them, and that was it. It was just a 4 hour training. Now, the night before, they invited me to their group of them got together down at the bar and they had drinks. But I just don't typically do that, especially with groups that I've never met before. Um, you don't want to drink too many, right? You're with the group, that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, so I didn't do that. But what I knew was with everyone in that room, they really they loved, and that's not too harsh of a word. They loved the person who was putting it all together. And so as I'm giving the training, I knew they didn't know me, they didn't trust me at all, but they loved her. So I used her for any positive example that I could. And she was just a great human being. So it wasn't hard to find great examples. I would just bring her up as often as I could. And I started the training out that day. Again, I knew I had to get them all on my side because I had only 4 hours with them. And so I started the training out that day. I changed up the training to thank her for the work that she did. And immediately the room came around. And I said, okay, we like him because we like her. And she introduced him, and then he said something nice about her and had us all applaud her, and we all like her. Now we like him, right? That's how it works. So if you don't have the relationship with people in the room, borrow it from someone. It's amazing how many times I see people not do this, right? There's someone in the room that everyone does trust, but they don't rely on that person. They think somehow they've got all the expertise, but it doesn't work that way. People trust people that they know. So if they don't know you, they're not going to trust you. They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to follow you. They're not going to, do what you need them to do. But if you can borrow that credibility off of someone else, that will help. So that's number one, is relationship. Have a relationship with people you're trying to communicate. That's part of connection. Number two is insight. It's what you know, right? Are you someone who is smart? Are you someone who is taking your craft seriously? They want to know that. Number three, success. What have you done? I'm here to tell you, you may not like it, but nobody wants to sit and listen to somebody who's never done anything and had any kind of success in life. It just doesn't, people don't want that, right? It's just how human nature works. We want to follow someone who is maybe a step or two ahead of where we are. And so success is a really great point in terms of, trying to connect with. I mean, think about people that you've gone to listen to speak, or you've gone to listen to, or even concerts, right? Concerts are a lot of fun. It's at least for me. Now some of you might be different. I'm more old school. I love going to see concerts, even if it's a group that I don't like, or a band that I don't know or like. If it's someone that I know has a track record, they've been around 10, 20, 30 years, that's always fun to go see, right? And then even in the room, you can sense that there's a community that's been built there, right? So that success is important, and it makes you respect the person a little bit more, that you know that they've been through and they've done some cool things. The ability, your ability is important. What you can do. What do you bring to the room? Do you have the ability to communicate? Do you have the ability to lead them? That's going to be important. People watch that. They're wanting to know that, right? If you've been in the military, you know this, okay? Uh, when a new, and I see it more in the military than any other field, when a new leader steps up in front of you, I don't care if they're male, female, I don't care what rank they have, if they step up in front of you and you can tell that they lack ability and capability, that they lack those things, immediately that connection goes down. Again, human nature is we want to follow someone who's a couple of steps ahead of us in life and in what they're doing. And then I love this last one here. This is a great connector: sacrifice. How have you, or how you have lived? Okay. So people will follow when they hear a story of someone who has sacrificed, and it doesn't have to be a major sacrifice, like I gave up my life or I gave up my limb or whatever it is. It could be when you hear stories about people who give up a lot for their kids, or someone who gave up a lot to stay home with a parent. Um, I think one of the best stories that I've ever heard was years ago. I mean, it has stuck with me. There's a famous, I forget what he did, but he's a person, most of you probably wouldn't know his name, but he was well known back in the 80s and 90s. I'm talking well known, very influential. And he told a story about how his dad was on the journey to becoming well known and influential. Both were kind of teachers, and his dad was on this journey to becoming well known and influential. And he, uh, but his dad, instead of doing that, what his dad decided was his son was starting to mess up in life, and so what he decided to do was he was going to stay home with his son, and that's as opposed to having a successful life, a successful career. He decided, I'm going to give all it up because my son needs me. And so his son went on to actually become incredibly successful in life. And so I've heard that story several times. I've heard it over and over, or I guess I've heard it a couple of times, but it stayed with me because when you think about the fact that somebody gave up their own career, their own march towards money and fame and influence, all that, they gave all that up because why? They wanted to be there for their kids. They wanted to be there for the success of their son, for the success of their daughter, and their son actually became a massive success. That's a story that sticks with you long term. Now, that's a story that you listen to and you say, "Man, that's the kind of person I want to be." And so, this person who became successful, um, uh, who gained a lot of followers in their lifetime, you knew that wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for this other person, weren't for their dad who had stepped back and said, I'm going to step back from my career because I want to sacrifice for my kid. And then their kid ended up doing incredibly great things. So when you hear that story, that's a connecting piece, is that idea of sacrifice. And so that's really important for if you're going to have, if you're going to find connection with other people. Again, it's these 5 things. It's the relationships you have. It's the insight that you have. It's the success that you've had in life. Again, people want to follow people who are 2 or 3 steps further down the road than they are. It's the ability that you have, and it's the sacrifice. How have you lived? So these 5 things are incredibly important. So here's what I want you to do for your assignment today. Okay. I want you to think through this. Now, we talked about earlier in the podcast, we talked about what are the non-connectors. And here's what I want to ask you to do. Okay. When you heard those non-connectors, and I'm not going to relist them because I want you to go back and I want to make sure that you heard that. Or if you're in the book, then they're all in chapter 5 here. Which of those non-connectors stands out to you as something that you might need to work on? Right. And so I just want you to be reflective on that. Is there something in your own journey that you could do better when it comes to connecting with people more? And then when you think about, so let's think from the positive now. When you think about the 5 things that you must have, the 5 must-haves, right, that we talked about, which one stands out to you as a way that you can really connect with your next audience? Whether that's an audience at work, the people you work with, whether it's an audience you're going to be speaking to, speak to which one of those would be good for you as you're trying to think about how you're going to, how you will connect with your next audience. Which one of those 5 stands out to you as to what you can bring to the table? Okay. Well, all this is important. Again, communication is important, but if you're communicating and you're not connecting, it just doesn't matter. That connection piece is absolutely vital to your communication. Thanks so much for listening today. I look forward to your responses, and I'll see you in the next podcast.